Imagine a city lost in darkness, shrouded in a veil of invisible horrors, forgotten and abandoned. He collects all the shades of darkness and madness in himself, creating an atmosphere of unbearable horror and mystery. Goldwell spread his gloomy streets under the shadow of twisted, grotesque sculptures, which, as if alive, perform a dance of madness and distort the usual perception of reality. Buildings are worn out by time in an ominous look that repels the brave and attracts only the desperate. Cold winds, carrying with them the cries and groans of lost souls, pierce the city with their icy streams. Dust and fog mix, creating phantom figures of shadows, like the embodiment of forgotten suffering and lost hopes. In the darkness, the oppressive moonlight shines, which casts long black shadows, like the hands of a mad ghost, touching every thought and heart. In the evening, when the last rays of the sun die down, the city comes to life. The shopping areas, once filled with noise and joyful noise, are now filled with quiet whispers and hidden groans. The faces of passers-by are hidden under masks of horror, and their eyes reflect excruciating torture and eternal anxiety. Goldwell attracts tempted souls who strive to reveal his ominous secrets, but with each step they plunge deeper into the abyss of hopelessness. Here reality mixes with a nightmare, and the mind crumbles under the pressure of the incredible and incomprehensible. This is a city where madness and darkness have become an integral part of local life, and the truth can be discovered only by those who are ready to risk their soul and mind. The story of Victoria Morgan, a cold-blooded and ruthless woman whose thirst for power and wealth leads her to plunge into the sin of greed, unfolds in the shadows of tall skyscrapers and urban bustle. She is ready to trample others in order to achieve her goals and will plunge into the abyss of greed, blinded by her own greed. Even success in the political arena did not satiate her ambitions. The flame of greed burns in her heart like a roaring engine pushing forward. In luxurious mansions and brilliant receptions, the woman is surrounded by chosen ones who serve her desire and wait for favors from the powerful politician. Bathing in wealth and luxury, she only fueled her thirst for more. Huge money swirls in the air like wild animals in pursuit of their prey. Envy and the desire to possess all the benefits of this world cover the minds of people, turning them into prisoners of their own desires. Everything starts somewhere, and Victoria's sins are no exception. The girl was born in a dark den of poverty and loss, at the cursed crossroads of life, and her past is shrouded in a gray veil of need and deprivation. In a desperate desire to leave a difficult life, she succumbed to temptation, the desire to become rich. Surrounded by luxury and power, the first germs of greed sprouted in the depths of her soul when Victoria discovered that money could become the key to freedom and security. Not paying attention to the possible consequences, she began a race for wealth regardless of who she would have to sacrifice on her way. Sin clung tightly to her heart and mind, turning her thoughts into distorted shadows of temptation and greed. As Victoria climbed the social ladder, she became increasingly detached from reality and empathy. She saw her old friends and relatives only as means to achieve her selfish goals. To quench her thirst, Victoria was ready for anything, turning out cunning machinations in order to get more money. The girl used people as puppets in her games of power, desperately throwing off the skin of doubt and conscience. She plunged step by step into darkness. She became a living example of how easily the soul can decay and turn into darkness when greed takes over. After years of hard work and relentless pursuit, Victoria Morgan has become a successful businesswoman, climbing higher and higher in her career. Her path to her dream was paved with other people's bones, sweat and blood, but in the dark hole of material wealth, this fact did not bother her at all. She became a victim of her own greed. Victoria's immersion in the pool was gradual and imperceptible, like a web thin and inconspicuous, but more and more growing. In the beginning, she pursued her goals with caution and conscience, but gradually she began to lose her sense of proportion and rationality. Money became not only a means, but also the main goal of her life. They began to determine her self-esteem and status in society, more and more plunging into the world of abundance and luxury, where material wealth became the main measure of her success and happiness. Victoria's craving for profit got out of control, and the thirst for wealth became merciless and inexorable. With each new deal and each profitable investment, she swallowed more and more, not noticing how she was losing her humanity and connection with reality. The negative effects of her greed extended to those around her. She began to use people as pawns in her games of power, ruthlessly placing them at her discretion. In her eyes, morality and ethics were useless barriers to her goals. It destroyed trust and divided people into winners and losers, leaving broken relationships and broken destinies in its wake. Losing herself in the ocean of wealth, Victoria became a prisoner of her own greedy desires. Her soul turned into a void, and ethics and morality receded into the background. She became an outcast of her own consciousness, unable to stop and realize the terrible consequences of her actions. Losing contact with others, Victoria began to reject her friends and family. The joy and tenderness that once filled her life faded before the glare of money. She refused to listen and understand those close to her, turning them into puppets in her enrichment game. She stopped caring about the feelings and needs of others, unaware that her greed was destroying everything she held dear. The consequences of her greed were devastating. Where there used to be love and harmony, she sowed discord and suffering. The trust she had been surrounded by was gone, leaving a void and disappointment in its wake. Victoria's greed not only hurt others, but also left an irreparable mark on her own soul. With every dollar, every transaction, Victoria became alienated from her true self. Her soul was drowning in an abyss of greed, and with every step she became more and more alone. Instead of enjoying her achievements, she felt only emptiness and dissatisfaction. Greed devoured her from the inside, leaving only bitterness and disappointment. One dark day, when the shadows of greed shrouded Victoria, she faced a catastrophe caused by her own greed. The gleaming facade wall she had painstakingly created from money and power collapsed before her eyes, destroying everything she considered her wealth. She was on the verge of ruin and loneliness, deprived of everything that was dear to her. At that moment, when everything was lost, Victoria experienced the deepest fracture in her inner world. In the depths of her broken soul, an awareness of the destructiveness of her greed arose. She realized that her whole life was built on empty dreams and material goods, and that true happiness cannot be found in a sea of money. This realization led to an inner transformation of Victoria. She was imbued with the bitterness of her actions and the rejections that she brought to others. She felt the weight of her sins and realized that money cannot replace true values in life. Victoria, speaking to those whom she had harmed with her greed, sincerely sought forgiveness. She sought to mend broken ties, giving everything she had to restore the trust she had shattered. But each of her attempts collapsed, like the lives of those whose lives were already fragments beyond repair. The girl seriously wanted to see the world in a new light, to feel moments of joy and true connection with people. But the consequences of pain and destruction caused by sin were irreversible. On a rainy evening, among the dusty streets, Victoria Morgan sighed heavily, feeling a deep anguish that penetrated the very depths of her soul. Long years of endless greed and ruthlessness have brought her to the edge of the abyss, where hope and joy have faded into darkness. In search of solace and temporary oblivion, she headed to an abandoned bar on the outskirts of the city. An ominous atmosphere reigned inside, and the soul of the building was imbued with the spirit of bygone times and unspeakable horrors. She felt that now something unusual and terrible, but at the same time relaxing, would come. Seated at the old wooden table, the girl took a deep breath, looking at the glass in front of her. At that moment, a young man dressed in tattered rags came over and sat down beside her. There was a strange glowing spark in his eyes, something magical and maniacal. "Good evening," said the stranger, his voice soft and hypnotic. "I saw you come here. Your suffering is noticeable. Let me hear the story of your soul." Victoria looked at him in surprise, as if there was a mysterious prophetic power in his words. Involuntarily, she relaxed and began to talk about her ruined life, about the sins that had brought her to this point of irrevocable insanity. As she spoke, the stranger listened intently, as if absorbing every word. His eyes shone more and more brightly, and his presence became more and more darkened and mystical. After finishing her speech, Victoria drained her glass, putting the empty kitchenette on the table. She felt the life energy leaving her body and the darkness engulfing her essence. She froze in place, feeling that her life was coming to an end. The stranger stood up and said softly, "For the ruined life of my father, your life must go." His voice sounded with piercing clarity, as if reciting some cursed ritual. In the blink of an eye, everything disappeared, and Victoria Morgan was left in the dark, deprived of life and the opportunity to correct her sins. What happened was more than just death. It was an act of an unthinkable, sinister exchange where life was given in payment for sins.